And then we have an outstanding panel of young Ukrainian reformers. I will not introduce them because you have bios, and I want to get right to the program. I'll just note you can follow us on Twitter at AC Eurasia # Future Ukraine. Frank, over to you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's a really great pleasure to be here at the Atlantic Council. This is obviously the premier place to study Ukraine, contemporary Ukrainian politics in the United States, possibly in the world as a whole. And it's a very great opportunity for us to bring our Ukrainian Emerging Leaders program here. I should just say a little bit about the people that will be on this panel. We have actually several different Ukraine-related programs at my center. So I'm the director of something called the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law at Stanford University. I'm the successor to Larry Diamond, who was the previous director of this program. We're basically both a research center, but we're also interested in policy and in actually having an effect on the world. And so we've undertaken a number of programs, training programs, to cultivate leaders in critical emerging democracies. The reason we centered on Ukraine is not an accident. In fact, we've been asked this quite a lot. Our three fellows have been in Washington for the past week meeting with a wide variety of institutions. But the choice of Ukraine, I think, is not accidental, because I think that Ukraine is really the front line of a broad struggle for liberal democracy with various populist and authoritarian forces in the world right now. And the impact of what goes on in Ukraine is going to be felt. So Ukraine is in itself an important country in Europe and in Eurasia. But the impact of what happens in Ukraine is going to resound through other parts of the world. And it will largely rest, I think, on what happens to Ukraine, whether its institutions develop in a democratic direction. The Orange Revolution in 2004 failed. It failed, I think, because there wasn't a sufficient appreciation of the need to develop institutions. Once you get the authoritarian older leader out of power, you actually have this tremendous job of construction to do. And I think that revolution failed because there wasn't follow-up in that, in terms of corruption, in terms of developing a state that could deliver effective services to its people. And as a result, unfortunately, Ukrainian civil society had to go through that whole process a second time with the Maidan revolution of dignity. So I think that there's been a recognition on the part of those activists that wanted something better, that they needed to not make the mistakes of the Orange Revolution and do better this time. But as in all of these revolutions, the political momentum has slowed. And so, that's, I think, going to be the topic of the discussion today. But the success of that transition will matter for Europe, and it'll matter for the world more broadly. The reason that the Russians are investing so much time and effort trying to undermine that democratic experiment is that they also recognize that it's going to have a significance beyond the borders of Ukraine. And therefore, I think that all of us in my center here in Washington, people that care about the fate of democracy worldwide are paying attention to this country and are putting a lot of effort into making it succeed. So I'm going to use the remainder of what I hope will be a fairly brief presentation to give you a little bit of my theory of social change, because it actually connects with what I think we're doing at Stanford and what I think Americans and other people on the outside can do. So I have been very preoccupied over the last 15 years with the question of governance. How do you get to governments that can actually deliver what citizens want, and to do it in a way that doesn't involve systemic corruption and unresponsive, unaccountable government? And a lot of effort, intellectual effort, has been put into this. Francesca Roccanantini at the World Bank and I did an article last year that will be published in a volume that is coming out from the Hertie School in Berlin. So 2016 was the 20th anniversary of James Wolfenson's Cancer of Corruption speech, in which he used the C word for the first time in the World Bank, made it central to the bank's mission. And what we were trying to do is figure out, after 20 years of focus by the IFIs and the development community more broadly on the subject of corruption and reforming governments, what did we know about the impact of external actors? And if you read that article, it's actually kind of depressing, because I think the bottom line is that for all of that effort, relatively little has happened. So we go through all of the different, approaches: reducing administrative discretion, creating specialized anti-corruption agencies like NABU in Ukraine, prosecutorial powers, changing laws, and so forth. And the bottom line is that although you can show empirical success at certain, low-level institutions like police forces or customs agencies or so forth, it's very hard to demonstrate empirically that overall aggregate levels of corruption have been reduced in particular countries or in the world more broadly. And oftentimes what happens is you push it out of one part of the government and it simply moves to another, oftentimes higher level, where it's very, very difficult to get at. Why is this the case? I think it is pretty straightforward. The reason that corruption and bad governance exist is not because governments are benighted and ignorant and they don't know what good government in a country like Denmark looks like, and therefore lecturing them about what Denmark does or what Singapore does or another modern government isn't going to do a damn bit of good. The reason that corruption continues to exist is it benefits very powerful elites within the society to be corrupt. And unless you can figure out a way of getting them out of power or limiting their power, you're not going to deal with the underlying problem. The problem with outsiders, whether it's the World Bank or USAID or the State Department or the IMF or any donor agency, is they don't have remotely the kind of political resources to bring about these kinds of internal changes. Conditionality on a loan, or kind of the ambassador going in and lecturing them. We Americans in particular like doing stuff like that, but that's not going to get at the fundamental problem, because the fundamental problem is political. You have to engage in political struggle, and for that, it is the people in the society itself. They are the only ones that can fundamentally bring this about. In my last book, Political Order and Political Decay, I actually spent several chapters describing one such struggle that was successful. That was the one that took place in the United States, beginning in the late 19th century and continuing into the early 20th. In the United States in the 19th century, we had a system of public administration that was corrupt from top to bottom, known as the spoils system or the patronage system, where virtually every American official, from cabinet officers all the way down to your fourth-class local postmaster, was a political hack put there as a result of a payoff to a politician. So systemic corruption in the United States, very poor quality services. And the question is, how did that get resolved? And the answer to that is it got resolved through about 2 generations worth of political struggle, where you had grassroots mobilization based on a rising middle class in an economy that was modernizing, where people wanted better quality services. It required good leadership in the form of people like Theodore Roosevelt or Gifford Pinchot or Woodrow Wilson that could actually give voice and direction to the grassroots movement. And it required a clear set of ideas about what kind of government you actually wanted to end up with. And the rearguard action fought, in the 1880s, when they passed the first Pendleton Act that really reformed the American civil service, there was not a single member of Congress that wanted this thing to pass, because it would take away their power of patronage. Why should they vote for this thing? So it required, an external event, which was the assassination of James Garfield, who had been elected president, to shock people into making that kind of concession. But even then, it was an uphill struggle. So, in a sense, it's a warning, and I mean, so I think that the caution here is that in a country like Ukraine, you're not going to get rid of systemic corruption overnight. I appreciate the big struggle that's been going on in the past year over NABU, but believe me, I mean, we actually, we followed like the 60 anti-corruption commissions that exist in the world. That's not a panacea. That by itself is not going to solve this problem. It's a much broader fight, and it has to be engaged in a political manner by young reformers. The conclusion of this is, why are we at Stanford bringing these young emerging leaders to Stanford? So in thinking about how do I, as an external actor, try to make anything better in a country like Ukraine or Georgia or, Bosnia or, Tunisia, I mean, the various countries we've operated in, my theory is that we are an educational institution, and the only thing we can do is actually try to cultivate a new elite. An elite of reformers that are interconnected, well-educated, that have the right values, that want liberal democracy, because they are the only ones that are going to be able to fix this problem. And I think, in general, this is, I think this applies to most of the external actors, that this is the area in which you can help, but the fundamental struggle has to be undertaken in Ukraine by Ukrainians. So I'm very delighted. Thank you very much for having us. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, to the Q&A back and forth. So thank you very much.
Right there? Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Melinda Herring. I'm the editor of Ukraine Alert here at the Atlantic Council. We are delighted to team up with Stanford to bring the first inaugural class of the Ukrainian Emerging Leaders Program. You have their biographies in front of you, so we're going to just jump into our discussion. So I'd like to ask you, we're 4 years out from the Euromaidan. I want to ask all three of you this question. In the press, there's been a lot of people saying that Ukraine's reforms have stalled. What do you think about that? Where are we? We're one year away from the next presidential and parliamentary elections.
Who can start?
Go ahead.
Okay, I can. My name is Alexander Starodubtsev. I know something about reforms because just after the Revolution of Dignity, I started the public procurement reform in Ukraine, which became one of the most famous so far. If anybody heard the name Prozoro, this is about it. This is the absolutely new reform of the public procurement. I was doing it as a volunteer for almost a year, and then moved to the government and worked on a government position for more than 2 years. So I know both sides around the barricade, and I can do my personal conclusions about all of that. I think that we did a lot, we struggled, we probably could do more, and the fact that reforms are slowing right now down, it's a fact. It's really difficult to argue with that. But we Ukrainians always want to blame somebody or to ask for some political will, and I'm truly grateful to Frank Fukuyama, who in 2016, when I for the first time appeared in his program, another program, Leadership Academy for Development, he told them, Ukrainians, stop ask for political will. Putin has perfect political will, is in his country. Do you want the same? We definitely don't want the same political will. So your job is not to ask for political will or ask everybody to do reform in your country. Your job is to study how to make stakeholders coalitions, and move and push reform forwards. And I was absolutely lucky as Dmitro to appear in the government in Ivaras Abramovichus, Max Nefedov's team, the truly team of reformers. And we did a lot. We did Prozoro. Now Prozoro sales is started for privatization. We showed how the government can be young, can be result-oriented, can deliver the results. We just need more of such teams and such results.
Alexander, let me jump in there. How much has Prozoro saved Ukraine to date? Do you have a figure for us?
Just by okay, I checked it yesterday. It's 44 billion hryvnias right now. It's $1.5 billion. But the question not about the figure itself. The question is that Prozoro, from my point of view, the greatest results of Prozoro, the first that Prozoro was created on, we call it golden triangle of partnership, close collaboration of business, civil society, and the government. And only with this collaboration and bottom-up efforts to do reforms, reforms could be done in Ukraine. And the second point, that we actually showed the whole country how to do reforms, because we piloted a lot on the civil society basis. From the very beginning, we were just civil activists, and we, as just civil activists, we had this right for tries and errors to find how finally the public procurement system should look like in Ukraine. Because if I were a civil servant or government official and tried with tries and errors, on the second day I will be in prosecutor's office explaining where is the government money and everything about mistakes. That's why in Ukraine the correct approach for reforms, I think, is to start on the civil society basis and then transfer all the results and ourselves sometimes to the government.
Gotcha. Alexandra and Dmitro, can you give us your thoughts on this bigger question on where we are in terms of the reform agenda? Go ahead, Alexandra.
There are a hot discussion about recent achievements, and some people convinced that the glass is full empty, and other people convinced that the glass is half full, and another people convinced that the glass is half empty. But the right question is whether we have enough fluid in this glass to make a quantitative leap and to exit the zone of transition in which Ukraine have been for decades. So this is the right question, and here there is a huge doubt. Of course, we have a lot of positive achievement for recent years, and my colleagues can present you bright examples of their own work, but still it is a question, do we reach the point of non-return?
Yeah.
And this is the unclarity of our situation. So I think that there are a lot of work which we have to do, and I'm looking in future with optimism, but I don't see it easy. It will be difficult.
Yeah, I'll probably also share some portion of optimism. I would definitely agree that there is some slowdown in the reform, but not to the extent that is usually perceived by the observers, because this is the price of democracy. Actually, Ukraine is a democratic country, and we have a coalition in the parliament. We have a coalition government, and closer to election, yes, it could be disagreements around it, and some decisions are going slower. But when usually people mentioning that the reform and slow it down, there is a slowing down on the reform that they are following. But because a lot of other things happening. So, but even in the case of anti-corruption court, there was a first reading. Now we are going to the second reading of the law, and there is a chance that it will pass. This is probably the most following question right now among the international community and the internal community.
Do you think it'll pass?
I don't know. I'm not a political expert on forecasting the political decisions, but it has a chance. There is a great pressure on it. But there is a lot of other stuff is happening. So IPR, the first regional law of bankruptcy, the absolutely new law. It's just very recent decisions. If you look at the autumn, there was a medical reform, pension reform, and a lot of other stuff happened already. And I think that we really achieved there is a lot of great achievements for this 4 years, much more than we've done for the previous 25 years. The truth is that it's not enough, and there is a number of really big zones that is not touched yet. So it's in my opinion there is such a big elephants like land market reform that we have done. Definitely, this is current situation is not good for this. We have to change it. The financial investigation service that will join the economic department of different enforcement agencies that we have. We have to do the further currency exchange market liberalization because it will allow the foreign direct investments to flow in the country, and there is several other things that is crucial to make us prosperous in economic sphere. I'm more about the economy, probably less I can say something from the more humanitarian sphere. But I believe that there is a lot of things ahead of us. We've done a lot, and it's not time to be tired and to relax and step down from support of Ukraine. We have, I believe, I'm an optimist, but I believe that we need several more years, probably up to 5, to fix our at least major problems that we have. And back in Ukraine, probably we'll all deal with it with some kind of.
It's not the time to drink this liquid from the glass.
So Nova Vremya just published a really interesting cover story, and I think you guys have seen it. It says that the Euromaidan profoundly changed Ukraine. 84% of Ukrainians now say that they won't wait for the government to solve their own problems. I want to ask Alexandra and then you two gentlemen, in what ways can you see this new attitude in society and politics?
Indeed, Euromaidan changed the vector of country's development. Millions of people came out in the defense of their democratic choice and their dreams to live in a country where there are fair rules for everyone, where government is accountable to society, the judiciary are independent, and the police don't beat the peaceful students. And we paid a rather high price for it. One of the films about this event is called The Winter That Changed Us. And it seems to me that it's exactly emptily captured features. At the same time, according to recent survey, only 7% of Ukrainians told that they participated in active civil life. Perhaps we have enough of this 7% of people to make this quantitative leap, which I mentioned before, and exit of the zone of transition. But we have a huge potential of people who have just already realized their own responsibility, but have not still taken a step to implement it. It would be strange not to try to involve them in this process, and I think, and I truly believe, that civil society have expanded its circle.
Great, great.
This was actually the big surprise for me, the statistic that was published in Novaya Vremya, because all the other sociology that I'm looking at kind of not supporting this. Moreover, I see not growing, but the rather huge portion of paternalism in the vision of Ukrainians, and the current ratings of the populist party also kind of support my opinion. But I'm very glad that maybe in some circumstances the people started to think how we can tackle our problems on our own, and probably what helped them to change their mind is the decentralization reform, where the local government and the community start to think about themselves, when the creation of this so-called OSBB, this communal, this unity of the people who live in the same house, so they tackle the problem. On top of it, maybe it's just a distrust in general institutions and in politicians. And okay, if you distrust nobody, so probably you have to rely on your own. And this is kind of how the people start to think that they have to take their fate in their hands. So, but in general, I was surprised by the statistics.
Dimitri, can you say a little bit more about decentralization reform? I think it's one of the most important reforms and underreported reforms. And I can tell you, as the editor of this publication, I can't get anyone interested in it. Even if I put a beautiful girl, you know, and have a great title, I can't get people interested in it. But all of the civil society activists I talk to in Kiev say that this is one of the most important reforms. It makes a huge difference in ordinary lives. It makes a huge difference in power differentials, and it'll make a huge difference in the future of Ukraine. Can you tell us more about that? Do you agree with that? Is it really a super important reform that we should pay attention to?
I'm not a big expert on decentralization reform, but from the being Ukrainian, seeing how things happen and what decisions are made, I would agree that it's probably one of the most important reforms that Ukraine made, because finally our local governments are empowered to deliver things that they actually supposed to deliver. It's not. We finally going out of this Soviet style of Gosplan, and when all the planning permissions, I don't know,
central planning,
the money, central planning, when the money is decided in the capital, and then through the resolutions provided to the local. So now they have both authority, and the local communities have authority and resources finally to execute their power. And a lot of things changes right now. So we finally see that in the big and small cities and towns and villages there are roads, new roads. There are some improvements of the environment around. So maybe right now it's a small thing comparing to the number of problems we have with the utility sector, with the quality of the apartments and a lot of other stuff. But before this, it was not the case. Yeah. It was not the case before. And if you see the latest sociology, probably last week IRI published their very broad survey, that the trust to the local communities is much higher than to the central, to the local government is much higher than to the central power. So there is a lot of reasons behind this, but one of this is that the mayors and the city council started to execute their power on the people's will, what they want to make people live better. So yes, and another aspect of this decentralization reform is that it is actually growing new political elite for the country in general. So now, if previously the local council, how to say, member of the local council was powerless, so he has no reason to come to this politics and to solve the problem. So now he understands that the city has financial resources, that he can influence the life of the people who is living near him. And there is a huge intention to come to the politics for the new people, and probably this is another very important side outcome of this reform. So I'm a great fan of it.
Great, thank you. Alexandra, I want to ask you about the Let My People Go campaign, and this is an effort to bring international attention to the political prisoners that Russia has taken. How many Ukrainian political prisoners does Russia hold, and why does this issue not get more attention?
We have initiated and conducted Let My People Go campaign for several years now. The TV plays an important role in hybrid war led by Russia against Ukraine. In 2014, Levada Center conducted a nationwide poll on Russia. It's turned up that 94% of Russians received information about Ukraine from majority from television. That's why it should periodically shows in it so-called Ukrainian terrorists, Ukrainian spies, saboteurs, and carefully sculpt this image of enemy. This war has an informational dimension, and anyone can be a random victim, as confirmed by a dramatic story of Stanislav Klich. It seems to me that all this story with the detention of Kiev historian Stanislav Klich was only for purpose to recall 228 times in the documents the absurd mentioning of involvement of former Prime Minister of Ukraine Arseniy Yatsenyuk in the event of the First Chechen War. So it's absurd. In our list today we have more than 70 names, and there are among them film producer Oleg Sentsov, 19-year-old student Pavlo Grib, Crimean farmer Volodymyr Baluch, journalist Roman Sushchenko, Crimean Tatar activist Nariman Mamedinov, and others. But it's just a tip of iceberg. We don't know the real number. And the problem...
Where are they being held?
They held in Russia and in occupied Crimea, in detention. And the problem is that in Russia there is no independent judiciary, and it's useless to hope for something. The Putin has to make a political decision for prisoners to return home. It means that it has to become simply unprofitable for him to hold them. It's about very intense international pressure and sanctions. We often heard that there is a Putin who has a key to release political prisoners. Indeed, and actually, Putin has a legally detained person. It's a West who has a key to release them.
So would you say it makes a difference when our Western ambassadors use these names, talk about these cases? Does that help at all?
It helps because a lot of political prisoners are tortured. And when you became this name on the public and provide more attention to them, it's a guarantee for people not to be tortured. For example, Stanislav Klich, which I mentioned before, he was tortured so severely that it caused to mental disorder, and now it's become obvious for all, not to Russian courts, unfortunately.
Alexandra, tell us more about a new report that that RFERL, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, has just highlighted. You've put together on torture in the occupied territories. How widespread is the practice?
It's a big problem because since the beginning of the war, this illegal armed formation controlled by Russia, they started a terror against civilian population in order to quickly gain the control over the region. The first victims were journalists, civil activists, and people who publicly expressed their disagreement with occupation. It branched network of sites, which is called cellars, was created. A majority of them are not appropriate even for short term of maintenance of people, but hostages have been kept for years in it. And since that time, I personally and my colleagues started working on collected evidence from victims of torture and abduction. It's very hard stories. The first our reports we called "Those Who Survived the Hell," and it's not a metaphor. Every second civilians interviewed for this report was tortured. These people have not just beaten. I spoke with people whose fingers were cut, eyes were pulled up with spoon, who were raped, who were smashed in wooden boxes. I spoke with young women who were captured being pregnant, and when she begged not to beat her and save a life for her unborn child, she was told, it's good that ukrop, which is mean Ukrainian, child will die. So according to the systematic nature, extent of this organized violence and conscious policy for terror, all of this confirms that we are dealing with crisis against humanity. And now, in the Minsk list of hostages, which are discussed in the Minsk negotiation, we have more than 100 names, and among them serviceman Sergei Glondar, Donetsk journalist Stanislav Aseyev, even child like Yaroslav Mironov. The relatives are waiting for some of them more for 3 years, and the problem is that this Minsk list of hostages is not full. According to Kremlin Republics, only in Donetsk last year, 246 people were detained in suspicion of espionage and
spying
and state betrayal. Thank you. We don't know who they are and what condition they have. We don't know the real extent of this phenomenon. The only thing we know for sure that the practice of abduction, torture, and illegal detention of people who live in occupied by Russia territory of Donbas are continuous. And here I want to present the open statement which is signed by more than 50 human rights organizations from Ukraine to Kurt Volker with our vision, what has to be priorities in the Minsk negotiation, and releasing of hostages is one of them.
Great. Did you have a chance to meet with Ambassador Volker while you've been here?
Unfortunately, not yet.
Well, we'll make sure he gets a copy. Okay. So, gentlemen, I'd like to go back to business now. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Alexandra, as you know, is the chairwoman of the Center for Civil Liberties and really focuses on those legal issues and on torture as well. Dmytro and Alexander, I'd like to return to this question of Ukraine's business climate. Why hasn't it improved more? Economic growth is far below what it should be, and FDI is really is pretty close to zero.
Do you want to start?
Actually, it's your topic.
This is called Pass the Buck. Go ahead.
There is several reasons behind it. I thought about it rather long time, and first of all, I would agree with a lot of commentators that say that the war is not an excuse for not doing reforms, but the war is really complicate the situation. I remember very well 2015 when I just started in the Ministry of Economy, and we had numerous of draft laws prepared and registered in the Parliament, and there was just no place in agenda to vote for these laws because of the laws connected to the defense, to the military, and to the social and financial crisis stuff we experienced in 2015. It was really hard situation, and we have been managed to do some kind of specialized days, the deregulation day in the Parliament, and some specialized days. So we kind of find out the way how we can pull this agenda into the parliamentary. Unfortunately, we need a lot of laws. It's not just the cabinet minister decision. We need the parliament. We need a lot of stakeholders. So this is the one side of the problem why we hadn't achieved bigger results to the moment. Secondly, now in general, the situation in Ukraine is really complicated in terms of business climate, and there is so many things that have to be fixed that partially we already fixed it. So I will say that it's a tax reform that is to the bigger extent done. It's a banking system reload and restart. It's the gas market, electricity market reform that we've done, and deregulation. A lot of achievements in deregulation, and a lot to be done. But there are several things that is still blocking and not allowing for, I don't know, big amount of FDI coming. So as I mentioned, this foreign investigation, not foreign, financial investigation agency that it will help to It will help to business to protect themselves from the interruption from the different enforcement agency and continue the liberalization. So,
what about courts? What about courts?
The thing is that you cannot do just half and then expect that without the other half, the thing will become better. So you have to do all the things together, and it requires time, unfortunately.
Time is running out. We're a year away from the elections, though. I mean, we're at a really critical point. Last year, yes, there were reforms that were passed. We had education, health, and pension. But justice reforms have stalled. And if you talk to the business community, the thing that they say over and over again is that we want a real working court system. And the Supreme Court reform failed last year. So should we expect any momentum? Do any of you think that there'll be any momentum on courts this year?
I actually don't think that the Supreme Court reform already failed.
If you talk to civil society activists, they'll say that the Supreme Court was not cleaned up. You have the same bad judges in there. You have more than 25 bad judges still on the Supreme Court today.
Maybe I will tell a little bit just to understand what's going on in Ukraine and why our reforms have so not systematic character and not incompetence in nature. We have to understand that after Euromaidan, we has not a reboot of political system and changes of elite, and it's the main answers. Of course, we have a lot of positive change, but from my point of view, when I look to the judicial reforms, which we on some point highly supported, on another point highly criticized, like with the situation with cleaning of Supreme Court, or the recent situation with procedure of peri-attestation of judges. At other, we look our authorities like equilibrists who from one side want to achieve some positive changes, but for another side want to maintain the control during these electoral circles. And the problem is that next year we will have an election, and third party third force has to appear into the confrontation between oligarchs and populists. And this third force has to provide a country movement into direction or which was outlined by Revolution of Dignity. This third force has to hold the general framework of Western values and influence heavily to the formation of country agenda. And the young parties who is the same kind of direction are currently being formed, so this vacuum has to be filled by consolidating civil society. So the task for civil society in Ukraine today is to develop the common civil society agenda, stop working not only on very narrow things, become a subject of policy, and provide enough energy to move country in this development.
That's a great point, Alexandra. And right now, I think what's interesting is there's probably 3 or 4 reform parties that would be competing for this sort of Euromaidan vote. You have Samopomocz, you have maybe your most famous rock star who may be jumping into politics. We're all waiting to hear about that. And then Sylvie Ludet, Dem Alliance. You have some smaller parties. So it's, do you think that there's a possibility that these parties will work together, or do you think that we're going to see more than one sort of reform party in the elections vying for that vote?
I'm now in California, but I try to follow the news in Ukraine, and I know that for current moments there are a lot of such kind of negotiations. So we will see in the nearest future.
You also have a future as a political analyst. Let's go down to Alexander. Alexander, I wanted you to give us an update on privatization. We've been told that the privatization drive this year is serious. How many properties are on the block, and will Prozorel be used in this privatization drive?
Actually, I'm absolutely not a specialist in privatization. This is not my topic. And honestly, I can admit that when Max Nefedov came with the idea to create Prozoro Sale, this is the sister project for not procurement but selling government property, I was against.
Okay.
At that period of time, I strongly believe that we didn't have enough capacity to afford ourselves one more big infrastructure which needed for at that period of time a bank's guarantee fund, where they started this Prozoro sale initiative. Thank God Max didn't listen to me and created Prozoro sale, and this is a sister project. They are sitting in the same building. We use many shared facilities, but they have absolutely their different agenda, and they won different prizes all around the world right now, not connected in any way with Prozoro prizes. It's better to ask Alexei Sobolev, the head of the initiative, what are the predictions. But as I know, they piloted the system well. The law already passed through the government. They need bylaws, and I think there would be a struggle there, but I'm absolutely sure that this is a well communicated. Actually, how we impacted to Prozoro sale, we taught them a little bit how to communicate their reform, because at that period of time, I personally myself every week posted weekly updates on my Facebook page, what's going on in Prozoro. And Alexei Sobolev just downloaded all my files and started do the same. And this reform became a little bit over-communicated as Prozoro, so everybody right now knows about their successes, about volume of sold things, about Lenin monuments, which are selling through this system all over Ukraine. You can easily buy Lenin monument.
How much do they go for?
Actually, I don't know, and I'm not sure that Amazon can deliver it here if you if you need it.
I'll be in Kiev next week. Let me ask you a question that you can answer. Are there other innovative ways that technology is being used to cut down on corruption in Ukraine?
I believe in technology. Actually, my future efforts in Ukraine after returning back to Ukraine is about changing culture and technology in the government. Because even if we are talking about decentralization, the huge, very important reform, we give them budgets, but all their budgets, they have to spend over Prozoro. So we give them budgets, regions, but we see how they are spending them. And this exactly what informational technology helps you to do. How Stanford impacted, to my knowledge, before coming to Stanford, I was totally believe in transparency. The more transparency, the better. In Stanford, I understand another side. You can demand every minute some kind of information or criticizing the government that you honestly won't give them the possibility to work. What allows information technology to do, simultaneously increasing the effectiveness of the government, because the whole workflow is going much quicker and better, we understand that. You can grab this information and you can analyze this, you can structure it and do all the things that you can do right now. Just type in bi.prozoro.org, you can compare all information about public procurement in Ukraine. Online, hands-on, right here. And the more we have such systems all across the government, which not push the civil servants to report every minute, but which allow to do that automatically, the better. Because I'm totally agree with Alexandra that the more pressure from civil society to the government. I personally myself, I spent in a government more than 2 years, but in my soul, I'm not a civil servant, and I agree the more the pressure from the civil society, the better. This inside pressure and outside from international partners, these are two pressures that press from two sides and push our government to move forward.
Thank you so much. I was really intrigued by your statement that reform should start and sort of experiment in civil society. I think that's a really interesting insight. And thank you for sharing your future plans with us. Dmitry and Alexandra, what are you planning to do when you go back to Kiev, and how do you plan to apply what you've learned at Stanford to your professional life?
You see, I'm from civil society side, and civil society today is very strong enough. The volunteers and NGOs have the highest level of trust among Ukrainian population, while the president, government, parliament, and judicial system have the lowest. But the problem is that the full capacity of civil society is yet to be unleashed. What I mean, we all work in the narrow things. We have no ambitions to enter to a political agenda with our vision, consolidated vision about country. Civil society activists, volunteers, trade union, ecologists, they work separately. So when I return, I would like to start a work together with others of creation a platform, because we need it, for joint discussion of the most important social political issue of the country life. We need such kind of platform. We need to develop the civil society agenda. We need to enter into the dialogue with the authorities who are running for elections. And we need to shift the focus from populist agenda to the real necessity reforms which country needed.
What would you put on that short list of things that the country really needs? This is a question for all three of you. And Dmitry, we're going to have you tell us about your Stanford experience as well. If you could put 3 to 5 reforms on that list, what would they be?
I will start with judicial reform. We need a second wave of judicial reform, because right to fair trial is a crucial right, and it will help us to solve a lot of problems, and corruption is one of them, because corruption is institutionalized in Ukraine, which means that if we want to fight with corruption, we need to have a complete system who can able to do it. Second, I think that it's crucial electoral reform, which provides the opportunity for new political movements which currently being formed to enter to the national policy and to bring a new spirit and new energy to the political landscape. And third, I think that it's very important reforms which my colleagues will tell more about. It's state service reform. And I will stop here, because I'm sure that Alexander will provide more insight about it. And also, I think that it's not sphere of my competence, but we need such kind of economical reforms which can help to create a middle class. In Ukraine, we need the middle class, a huge amount, because this is the people who are active in social life and who can deliver responsibility for their own shoulders. And I strongly believe that we have to do everything in our country. We can't afford to fail. We pay too much high price. And we need to be sure that in future, any power, any party, any color, any names will never give an order to gunning down a peaceful protesters.
Actually, I'm totally agree that we probably the first priority is judicial reform. We need justice, and the business climate depends directly, and international investments depends directly on justice. But I like the story. When I came to the government, I didn't know which book to read about how the government works and where I am, because I'm from business and I get used to read book about business management, human resource, marketing. I didn't know which book start to read. Only in half a year I was introduced to Frank's book, to institutionalism, but the first book that I read being appointed to official position was Anders Aslund's book, The Great Rebirth. Thank you very much.
It's available on Amazon.com.
It's available in Ukrainian language
That's
right
wonderful.
now, yeah, which is critically important, because I read it in English at that period of time and really struggling, because it had these problems with English. The main idea, as I understand it, maybe it's wrong, that your gradual reforms don't work. You have to do all the reforms simultaneously. This is all the authors in the book. That was general message, that despite you need judicial reform right now, if you see the space for deregulation, just do it. If you see the space for healthcare reform, just do it. I don't want to PR Nike with just do it much more, but just do it.
Actually, they said pretty much everything what I want to say. I agree that we need the continuation of the judicial reform, and very much agree on the economic development reform, for all the scope of the economical development reform. Because right now, Ukrainian economy is still too concentrated, too oligarchic, there is a till the moment still there is a big state sector of economy, and we have to grow the new economy. We have to grow the new companies and the new spheres. Doesn't matter in which exactly. So is it IT or finance sphere or telecom or whatever? They just have to be a new economy that will decrease the influence of this old economy that we have right now. So why all the thing connected to the deregulation, demonopolization, the rule of law is very, very important for us. And I agree with Sasha that public administration reform is the reform of reforms, because effective state will help a lot with the pace with which we are able to run.
And what are you going to do after you go back to Kiev?
When I will back from Stanford, I will definitely be in or very close to the government, continue the work on the economic development. One of my favorite topics right now, I want to have the land market reform happen finally. It's very challenging.
How many times have they tried to pass the reform? Is this 8 or 9, 10?
I don't know how much time they tried to make a reform, but probably they voted 7 or 8 times for continuation of the moratorium. It's now the 15 years of the moratorium existing, and I see a chance that we will be able to do it finally, because it will be a huge impact, positive impact on the economy. It's actually also will be help to develop the medium class, especially in the rural areas that is now struggling with the not so good economic conditions. So I strongly believe in the benefits of this reform, and I see some chance to make it happen.
Go ahead.
Sorry, if I may add on the public administration reform, because this is my personal pain. I truly believe that, still believe that you should start the reform on the civil society basis, but then after transferring everything to the government, it can go through the government in an absolutely different speed. And if we fix this public administration reform problem, let's call it this way, we can come to an absolutely different speed of reforms within the government. And this reform has been already started, and it's supervised by European Union. And here, if you allow me one more advertising here in this room, I strongly humbly asked all Americans to step in, because European Union is concentrated in 2 areas: policy formation and pure Weberian selection. I know from my ProZorro experience that it's not enough. To be effective inside the government, it's not enough to know what is policy and to follow these strict procedures of selection people. It's important. But we need just more simpler managerial things, which allow people inside the government become more effective from the very beginning. And we need this change of culture and technology. Sometimes very simple technology. Google Docs, Facebook reports, very, very easy thing. And this is the stuff which unfortunately hasn't covered yet. And we can do the same thing as we did in ProZorro. European Union held ProZorro on the very first stages with policy formation, but only after USAID came in, we were able to do absolutely different type of things. So if here in the audience,
USAID is listening. They're here.
Yeah, hello USAID.
Alexandra, and Dmitry, thank you very, very much. We will be following your careers. We wish you all the best. Now we're going to invite our audience to ask a question, and questions have a question mark. Please say your name, tell us where you're from, and please ask a question, not issue a statement. Miroslava Gungadze, right over here, please.
Miroslava Gongadze, Voice of America. I was listening to you, a very interesting and very different approach to things. My question is, I was a little bit surprised by you not mentioning political reform, because the one issue that we have in Ukraine, that there is no social lift, and all this leadership that are created on the local level and in civil society, they don't have opportunity to go and change politics. So I would like to ask you about political reform. How do you see it, and do you see it happening fairly soon? Because Ukraine is facing presidential and parliamentary election, and Ukrainian political parties created as a limited liability corporations, not as a political party. And how do you see the open party list, idea of open party list, finally implemented? Thanks.
Great. Who'd like to take that?
I will start. Thank you. It's a great question. I think that electoral reform is a part of huge political reform which can provide this opportunity to new political system, which is real political parties to enter to the game where non-real political parties are playing. Because, Miroslava, you're totally right. Unfortunately, we haven't political parties. We have like political electoral projects who now consider the future and current situation in Ukraine, the parliament and government. And of course, there are some other things which has to be done in the front of main political reform. And I think one of this issue is the power of president. For example, our president have to appoint his representative in all, not even regions, but we have the rayon, how it's called in English?
Small community.
Districts, representative in each district. We have these districts much more than days in 1 year. So he has to appoint a person without, and he couldn't provide such kind of appointment very clearly because he have no time. If he even spent 1 day for one person, there is no such many days like we have such kind of districts. And there are a lot of other issues like this, and I think it's also crucial and has to be done. And second, your question is when there is a room for such reform. Unfortunately, not before election. I think that we have a chance if we make the joint efforts, civil society and international community, because the recipe of Ukrainian reforms is very simply. Civil society kicks, international community kicks, and non-repair state machines started moving in the right direction. And we have a room for electoral reform. That's why I named it. Political reforms like this, with the changing of constitution, unfortunately, I think there is no chance to be happened before election. But electoral reform is.
Did you want to?
Yes, I would agree that we really need the new electoral law. Because current electoral process is not fulfilling its actually option to provide the representation. I'm not a fan of the draft law that passed the first reading because it's not fixing the situation. It's just making the process more complicated, and that's it. So we probably should consider the new version of the law. And in general, I like the idea of the open lists, but not the way how it's done in the current draft law. And I will a bit disagree with you that now the social lift is closed. It is not closed. The government is rather open, especially comparing to Yanukovych times. So there is a lot of open, how to say, concourse
selection,
open selection for some position in government. There is a lot of okay, not a lot of, but there is some portion of young blood in the government. There is local councils that also bring new politicians. So I cannot say that it's closed, but yes, there's definitely a lot of improvements can be made.
Can I take another question?
No, we can skip my comment easily.
Right here. gentleman. Yep. Mhm.
Sorry, Sasha.
Thank you. Martin Herman. I know quite a bit about transition. I heard a question that there are three parties, reform parties, contending for the elections. Is it a possibility so they would unite and work as a one party? Why not?
Everything is possible. The problem is that the talks about it is surrounded for a really long time, and previously it doesn't happen. So there is always a chance that it will happen now, and a lot of people really hope on this. But will it happen or not? I don't know.
Okay, next question. This gentleman right here, please.
Thank you. Garth Trinkle. I'm an economist who's done some work in the past on institutional reform in Poland. And my question is actually, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the talk about torture in occupied Crimea. For someone who follows Ukraine intensively, you really articulated that issue well, and I hope that you're able to speak out much more on the issue of torture within sovereign Ukraine. And best wishes to the economics ministry. But my question goes back to your last comment on public administration and governance. And the question was, what can you ask of America to do for you? And you were beginning to discuss the difference between what the EU has offered you in the 4+ years since Ukraine turned west rather than toward Russia. And I also want to refer back to the opening question that it took 2 generations or 40 years for the corruption to get out of the U.S. system between 1880 and 1920 approximately. So my question is, I think someone said that Ukraine could have been better served 20 years ago, and it could have not lagged so far behind Poland and Romania and Bulgaria, which has left Ukraine on a per capita basis 1/3 as well off on a per capita basis as Poland, if there had been greater technical assistance for governance in Ukraine. Well, if you look at the per capita income of Ukrainians right now, it lags significantly behind Poland and even Romania. But my point is, could you go ahead a little more on, you've just spent some months at Stanford, which is a center of technology development, and also California, which is a leading U.S. federal laboratory for policy reform. And California government is
What's the question, please?
The question is, how could technical assistance be provided for governance in the regions of Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Go ahead.
How to start? Because the question was rather broad regarding why Poland is much more ahead. I think there is a common consensus that it's not only about the technical assistance, it's about the culture inside the country, and being under the Soviet Union, Russia, or any other type of Russian empire. Of course, being there for 300 years, it's a little bit more difficult than being there for 50 years. And in 1991, when Soviet Union fell apart, I think all Poles were absolutely agree about their movement to West. In Ukraine, we have many discussions with whom we should stay. I'm personally from Eastern Ukraine. I'm from Kharkiv. And this is 40 kilometers to Russian border. And there are still many people who think that much less people after 2014 and after the war. But there are still many people who think that this is our brother country, sister country, and we should listen to them, etc., etc. Poles didn't have that. Regarding public administration, trying to be very short, I believe more in culture than rules. And Europeans right now teaching us how to make governance from the point of rules. And I more believe, especially after reading chapter 35 from Frank's book, Political Order, Political Decay, I know definitely right now that the recipe for success is not about rules, but about the full discretion, full responsibility, and internal incentives. Internal incentives means culture. So as we always say, get into Denmark, how to get to Denmark, how to create this level of governance like in Denmark. And probably not because in Denmark they are very well regulated. It's in their culture to serve their country. We didn't have this culture of servant leadership for centuries. It should be reinstalled. We have a good push from the Maidan revolution, from civil society, to come to the government and change things for the better. But I think that right now a little bit another component of this reform should be covered. It's not covered yet. I'm ready to cover that. Where is USAID? I'm here.
We can talk during the reception with USAID. Let's take two questions right here, please. The lady and then the gentleman behind.
Hello. My name is Eleanor Backrack, and I work for USAID on economic reforms in Ukraine from 1995 to 2000, and then we were something like the second largest technical assistance program of AID, and we worked on all these things you've mentioned, though maybe it was a bit early, but we tried. My question we also recognize that we really need to work with young people, with emerging leaders, and in fact we had some outstanding young Ukrainian colleagues in all our projects, including mine. And then I returned to the U.S. and encountered all of them back here, many of them hoping to stay, which, I guess so I wonder whether this brain drain, as we might call it, has eased up, or whether you're still losing a lot of talent to other countries because of people's own interests.
Great, thank you. And there's a new study out, I think by Bloomberg, a new article out that shows that a large percentage of Ukrainian workforce is actually in Poland. Just to put a fine point on it, how are you going to keep smart, talented Ukrainians in your country with an economy that's underperforming?
Exactly, not with taking passports from them, not with these measures.
And not with structures.
It's a little bit Russian style of business. It may be not too popular to say like that, but I think that if people can find the better place right now for self-expression, for their families, it's not a problem that they are going. They stay Ukrainians. And if we make our homework at home and create fair conditions for them to come back, they will come back. And we have many good examples of very powerful diasporas, not only in Ukrainian cases, in Irish cases, in Indian cases. It's good that we have powerful diaspora. As soon as we do our job at home, I think many of them will come back. I am absolutely sure in that.
100% agree. 100%. So we have to make our economy prosperous, and Ukraine should have to be a just better place to live, and we'll solve this problem. Otherwise, we cannot solve it. That's it.
Are you guys planning to live in Ukraine all of your lives?
Yes.
Who knows? Sure.
Who knows? Okay. Okay, this gentleman here. Yes, please. Just wait for the microphone, please. Here it comes.
Thank you very much. My name is Darian Diachak, and this is kind of a follow-up to what the young lady here said about, she's from USAID. I just completed about 2 months ago a USAID evaluation of the Municipal Energy Reform Project. And what I discovered is something very similar to what you said, which is that in eastern Ukraine, people are still very much looking for a centralized approach. You know, what is the central government going to tell me to do? We discovered that in Western Ukraine, the municipalities there very often lose patience with the central government because it's slow, it's corrupt. Some, even a USAID official estimated that as much as 70% of is simply lost in corruption that should reach the municipalities. So the Western municipalities very much have taken the initiative on themselves. They find their own ways to get funding. They conduct their own reforms, and they really are kind of a beacon to what decentralization can be. Okay, so there is a lot of international...
What's the question, sir?
Pardon?
What's the question? Can you please give it to us in a sentence?
There's a lot of there's a lot of experience with decentralization. Okay, what I would like to see is maybe more of that of USAID to help Ukraine with the process of decentralization.
Okay, that will...
I can reply to this. Right now, all these local communities that is newly created has really huge amounts of money on the bank deposits that they cannot absorb because they just not used to such amounts of money, and they previously they even didn't think that they can complete some big projects, and now it's kind of a new thing that they have to realize how to do, and really the help of financial planning, of the financial literacy even for this community would be really helpful, and probably especially on the east because it's the border with the Russia, border of the conflict, and we have to show that it's kind of good in Ukraine, and the help on this on the east will be really appreciated, I believe.
Thank you so much. We're going to give the last question to Ambassador Chali, and then we're going to break for a reception. Please,
thank you, Milena. I'm not sure this is a question, but I tried to ask a question. But before my question, I just want to thank for Stanford for this program, Professor Fukuyama. I was there. It's a very fresh perception of what's going on in the world, and in Ukraine in particular. And thank you, Atlantic Council. But I want to mention only one thing and question about book. Do you know this Atlantic Council and the team of Ukrainian very motivated NGO civil society leaders in 2003 finished the project about management, how we should work, how government work. Well, we have this, I lead this program from Ukrainian civil society side. So my question, first of all, thank you so much. You give me some food for thoughts for myself as a former leader of civil society and now ambassador. And I spend a lot of time in our, as you were mentioned, from both sides of this wall. My question, and the same as Melina asked you, not reforms, but just each of you will give us one thing we must do is the very next time, I mean, I don't know, 1 year, most important. We, I mean Ukrainian people, not Americans, not USAID, but Ukrainian people. And second one, what we must do in the midterm perspective. Midterm, this point of view, 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's start with Dimitri.
I believe that we all three agree. We talk about it a lot of time, but that we need complete judicial reform, and it can be completed at least to big extent during the 1 year. So correct me if I'm wrong. In the midterm, I believe that economic development set of the reforms have to be done, because we cannot afford ourselves to live with 2% GDP growth, because it's just impossible to sustain the war, the living standards, the all NPLs that now banks have. So we have to start growing. It's just a matter of survival.
I can continue build up on what Dima said, that if you need concrete, very concrete things, I'm not a specialist, but I think it looks like anti-corruption court should be created finally. We can start with that, our judicial, redesigning judicial reform, understanding that all the community around Ukraine agrees right now this thing should be finished. And in 3-5 years perspective, I think we should just have to grow economically, and then this process will start this positive spiral. So the more money small medium enterprises will earn, the better will be associations. The better will be associations, the better they can influence on the political process or lobbying, advocating necessary legislation. So I would start, I believe in economical growth. And I think all roots are there. There is the start.
Let me conclude with on some symbolical point of view. We are in the middle of a marathon. It's a long game, and we have no right to give up, because it's not about only Ukraine. The success of Ukraine will have a reversible impact to the whole post-Soviet region. And Russia fully understood it. That's why it started a war with occupation of Crimea, with creation of these paramilitary groups in the Donbass, in order to stop us on the way of democratization. And when we, as a Ukrainian human rights defenders, ask Russian human rights defenders how we can help you in such very tough time, being under the pressure, maybe Ukrainian Human Rights Society can do something for you, they simply answered, be successful. That's all.
That's a great way to conclude this. Thank you so very much. We will be following, obviously, the future of Ukraine, and the three of you, congratulations on your selection in this program. It's extremely competitive. Thank you, Dr. Fukuyama. Thank you, Stanford University, for joining us. Could you please join me in a round of applause for our three fellows?
Thank you very much.